All right. Well, can you hear me all right in the back? Is the mic working? Perfect. Gotta stay close. So as a reminder, it's 5:30. This is a work session for the Planning Commission. We're continuing to work on land use code updates. We've got some new information that we've included in the packet for tonight. Consistent with how we've done the work sessions the last couple of meetings. What we'd like to do is go back and take a moment to review the information that was presented to you the last meeting and hear any feedback and guidance from the commissioners on that information. As you know, we're sending a lot of information your way, and it's hard to digest it in a meaningful way in a short amount of time. So that's why we're doing this kind of circular approach to presenting the information, getting a little bit of feedback, and then giving you another opportunity for more feedback the following meeting. So we've talked about the landscape and irrigation standards, a landscape design manual, and we've provided information for the first couple of chapters of the land use code, which deals with some of the high level processes, administration, and application processes. So I've received an email from one commissioner with some kind of preliminary feedback on mostly the landscaping components, but we have gotten some feedback but from one person. So if there's other thoughts and feedback from the rest of the commissioners, we can discuss that now. And you can always continue to send me emails with any of your thoughts or questions or concerns on the information presented. So that introduction aside, maybe we could spend 10 or 15 minutes on feedback from any of the materials that have been provided at the prior work sessions. If any, and if you don't have anything, I'm not going to wait 10 minutes of silence.
I don't have any stuff.
Okay, so generally liking what you've seen and still on the right path. Okay, that's great. Well, then if that is the case, then we're going to proceed with the new information that was included in your agenda packet. Just kind of start by giving you kind of a high level and some reminders. The Planning Commission recently adopted the comprehensive plan in August, and now we're working on the land use code update. In the comprehensive plan, we identified land use categories, and some of them are very similar to what are in our existing codes, and a couple are a little bit different. What we want to do as part of the land use code is make sure that our zone districts are consistent with the land use categories identified in the comprehensive plan. Including the new categories, and then working through those zone districts to make sure that the uses that are possible to be located within the town fit within one or more of those categories, and identify how, in which, or in what manner those uses can be allowed within those zone districts. So we have permitted uses, conditional uses, maybe there's room for a third category. We'll cover that a little bit more in detail here in just a moment. But we've included in your agenda packet the draft zone district descriptions. So those are the land use categories that we've identified. It includes the new category for mixed uses and the downtown neighborhoods. And some of the existing uses, the names carry forward, but we're proposing we revisit all the uses that are allowed in those districts to make sure we've got the right fit for the long range vision of the town. We've also included the draft definitions of all the land use categories that we're currently identifying. Jen Gardner from Logan Simpson is going to speak a little bit more about some of those uses in a moment, but at a high level, we've got some of the uses in our existing code appear multiple times in slightly different ways, and it seemed like it was a good approach to try to consolidate some of those to make sure that we're consistent throughout. And if we're making a distinguishing difference, like a pharmacy versus a pharmacy with a drive-through, that we've addressed that either as it's not allowed or is allowed in that district, or if it is allowed, it's allowed with certain stipulations for that particular addition of a drive-through lane, just as an example. And then the other reminders I wanted to make were just kind of the objectives that we're trying to achieve with the land use classifications. Throughout some conversations in the comprehensive plan, there was a lot of confusion around the transitional zone district. That's been a recommendation from staff for a while to evaluate removing the transitional zone district and instead identifying what those properties could or should be zoned as and what uses would be a good fit for that property based on the contextual elements. So as part of our proposal, the transitional zone district would go away and those uses would be allocated into the other commercial or residential categories. At a high level too, the reliance upon conditional uses in our current code is a little bit much. It puts a lot of burden on staff, the planning commission, the board to evaluate conditional use for everything. And it doesn't provide a lot of clarity for or consistency for what to expect when every single case is a special review. So we wanted to evaluate, do we need to make some of those uses that are currently conditional permitted uses? And if there's reasons to evaluate certain criteria, that we just define what those criteria performance standards are in the code. Go back to my notes here on the high level. We also wanted to take a closer look. I can't believe I forgot this, but that's why I made my notes. Our commercial categories, we've got currently 3 commercial categories. We're proposing to add a distinguishing difference for the downtown commercial and downtown neighborhoods. We want to make sure we get that fit correctly. That was a big topic of conversation in the comprehensive plan, was finding the right use of mixes for the existing residential areas and the commercial areas surrounding the downtown. And we also wanted to take a really close look at our industrial and light industrial categories. We've currently got a lot of uses that end up in the light industrial zone district, and they range from anything that should be and is appropriate for light industrial to some other uses that feel like it was maybe kind of a catch-all category at the time it was created or amended. Daycares or childcare centers in a light industrial district is allowed use under our current code. And I'm not sure that makes a great lot of sense. I mean, it's possible it could under certain circumstances, but at that point, it might be more like an accessory use to a business that needs to have childcare associated with it, as opposed to just a use by right. And there's some other examples similar to that in our current code. So we wanted to really take a close look at industrial, light industrial, and make sure that the uses we're proposing for those zone districts are compatible and consistent with the intent of the zone district. So those are some of the high level objectives for what we've attempted to do here. And as it's been presented in your packet, you've got a table of land uses in alphabetical form. That may or may not stay that way in the final draft. We can talk about how to present once we have the kind of nuts and bolts figured out. But for review purposes, we're alphabetical. The black text is our definitions, land uses, and which categories, which zone districts they're allowed in. Black text is existing code. So as you see it, there's some things that we've proposed changes to already. Those are draft changes, and we're happy to take a look at those further. But the green text in bold are some of the new categories, changed categories, and including which zone districts staff and Logan Simpson initially felt would be a good starting point for conversations for where those uses might be allowed. We highlighted some of the rows in orange. I think it's orange is the long-term look. There's a couple of uses that we know are going to have a lot of discussion around them, and they're they have a very strong basis in legal background. And so we do have White and Smith as our legal consultant on this land use code update effort. They'll be joining us in person at the December meeting. So we specifically highlighted those. We don't have to go into great deal tonight. We can touch base on them if you'd like, but we're going to have our subject matter experts at the December meeting to talk about those uses specifically. And then the yellow rows that we've highlighted are the ones that we've seen some significant proposed changes, either through consolidating some of the existing uses into one kind of umbrella use. Some of them are new categories that don't exist in the current code. And some of them are just the ones that we know that might need some discussion because they're not quite in the right place in our current code, and we want to get some feedback on those. So to kind of wrap that up, the yellow rows are the ones that we would like to have more discussion about tonight. The rows that are in black are ones that we haven't really touched yet. We feel like they're probably in pretty good shape, but can certainly be modified. And we can have those conversations tonight if you like to bring them up, or if you have any comments after the meeting, feel free to email those to staff so we can start to consolidate the comments and bring that back at a future meeting. So that's my high level. Jen, do you want to jump into your piece of the presentation tonight?
Sure.
Any questions on what I just explained in the format of what we're presenting tonight? Great.
All good. Do you guys mind if I take my mask off? Okay. I can speak pretty well through these, but okay. So Cody did a great job of explaining kind of the methodology behind what you have in front of you tonight. I know there's a lot in here and you haven't had a whole lot of time to absorb it. So we wanted to kind of introduce a little more detail of kind of our thought process and give you the option to react to that. And then we can discuss in more detail on December 6th when White and Smith is here as well. So by no means is this the end of this conversation. I think we're planning to continue this conversation at least over the next meeting. So as Cody said, we have divided this table up by the kind of the new proposed zone districts and so on. Part of our methodology with combining some of these uses is, you know, if you look at accessory dwelling unit, for example, right now you have two different uses in your use table. One is accessory dwelling unit with associated with a permitted use, and one accessory dwelling unit with alley access. They're essentially the same thing. And we can talk about the alley access versus front-loaded access or whatnot in the standards. So we look through things like that and say, okay, these are essentially the same thing. If you look at the zone districts they're allowed in that particular case, the second one, accessory dwelling units or accessory dwelling with alley access, is only a conditional use in C2. So that's where we want to have some of these conversations with you to say, you know, if you look down the two block lines below accessory dwelling unit, those are your existing designations. So currently you allow an accessory dwelling associated with a permitted use in agriculture, R1, R2, R3, and then it's conditional in light industrial and industrial. That second use is conditional in your C2. So there's a little bit of an inconsistency there, but they felt like the same use. So we've tried to consolidate them. Another good example is agriculture. You'll see there were several very lengthy descriptions of agricultural operations that are allowed primarily in that agriculture zone district. So we looked at, you know, a way to update that definition per the definitions that you have to say, you know, maybe it's one use that's agriculture, but the definition specifies all these additional pieces since they were all permitted in that agricultural zone. So one thing I'd like to kind of talk about tonight with you all is if that works, if these seem to be consolidated well, or if we need to break some of them back out. Convenience store, again, there's convenience retail stores with or without fuel sales, convenience shopping and retail establishments without fuel sales, and convenience shopping and retail establishments. So you see there's a lot of repetition. And so we're just trying to consolidate these the best we can. The other piece I wanted to highlight is the difference between a permitted use, the P's, and a conditional use, the C's, which I know Cody hit on really high level, but P, as you all know, is a use by right in that zone district, which means it's an allowed use, and it needs to go through, you know, say a single family home would go through your building permit process. Any commercial application would come through a site plan process. So, but there isn't the full, you know, it's an administrative approval. There's not the full hearing process like a conditional use. Conditional use is where there are conditions applied, and typically those are standards in the code. And if you meet those conditions, then you can potentially have that use on that site. Conditional use usually is thought of for higher impact sites or higher impact uses that might be, some of your industrial uses that would not be on an industrial site. So if you have a straight up industrial use in an industrial zone district and there isn't, your impacts wouldn't, impacts wouldn't affect anybody, neighbors around neighboring residences or anything like that, then oftentimes those could be considered a permitted use or use by right, because there doesn't need to be that the decision behind that. So I'm trying to think of some good examples of a good conditional use. Brewery, distillery, or winery is a good example. So sounds like a low impact use, but they are a fairly industrial operation. So, if you wanted to allow a brewery in one of your commercial zone districts, that's where you can use that conditional use application, because it would have a higher impact or a higher, you might have some noise and some smell and trucks coming in and out and different things like that, that you might want to be a little more specific about where that type of operation would be located. So then you have different standards listed out that would say, if you're near a lesser use commercial site, you would need to buffer with a landscape buffer or a setback. If you're going to have deliveries, you need to mitigate that impact. Making sure there's no noise above a certain decibel level to disturb neighbors, to something to that effect. So those are the kinds of specific standards that we would typically write in for conditional use, so that it's not an arbitrary decision of, well, I don't know if I really like that. It has to have some more standards and some more teeth to it to help you all make those decisions as well. So any questions on just the basic overall permitted versus conditional? Kind of how we've condensed this, and then I'll go into a little bit more on some of this. Yeah, okay. One thing that Cody and I have been tossing around is the option of, we are trying to make a few proposed changes to reduce the dependency on the conditional use, but there does sometimes feel like there's applications that don't quite fit in the full use by right category and maybe don't need to be elevated to a full conditional use. Some communities do what they call a minor development application or a special review, which can go through staff for review and then to planning commission, and it doesn't go all the way up to city council. And the purpose for that is to ensure that the development is meeting the planning, the intent of the comprehensive plan and the planning guidance with the town. So one example would be financial institutions. Say a lot of times on a main street, you like to keep the uses to more retail, active uses, retail, restaurant, commercial, some office space. A lot of times people like to see those financial institutions on the second level, like behind that main street, because you're going to access your financial institution, whether it's on the main street or not. But maybe someone comes in and they have a good reason to put a financial institution at one end of your main street. So to prohibit that use completely might not be the right choice. To have a full conditional use might not be the right choice, but if they meet certain standards, then maybe it would be applicable. So what we would do in that case is develop certain standards that would allow some uses a little bit more flexibility in some of the zone districts, typically more your commercial zone districts than your residential. So I don't know if there's any, I want to kind of get a little bit of an appetite for that. Is there an appetite for an intermediate kind of review process that we could start to develop and bring forward? Or do we like just conditional and permitted and keep it that way?
I'm absolutely a fan of that, because I think we have to acknowledge that there are some specific uses that require more checks. And I don't want to discourage those, in this case, commercial uses, right? I don't want to discourage those businesses from seeking Wellington, but I do know that we still need the extra special permitting or whatever it might be in order to use that, to have that usage. So I think for those special scenarios where we have different requirements or above and beyond requirements, I would like to see that happen. But at the same time, for those uses that we say are acceptable but need extra checks, I still want those processes to go as quickly as possible. So I understand both sides of it. Some are going to need more attention and more details, of course, but I also don't want to discourage them either. So I think that middle, that would save them extra month and sometimes between planning commission to going to trustee meeting and public hearings likely at both of them in a lot of cases. So that's a lot of work on the staff side for one. And if it's something that we already determined matches our comprehensive plan, is acceptable use, but just needs more, I'd like to make this go as quickly as possible, but still make sure that we have the opportunity from the staff and planning commission side to make sure that we're doing all the extra checks as needed. I think that's a great idea.
Grab my water while you guys are talking.
I'm gonna put you on the spot. How many conditional use applications did we get this year?
I don't recall offhand. I can get that precise number, but this year, have we done 3, 4? We'll look it up and get that to
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, on paper, I get it. It looks conditional use heavy because you see all these Cs. I mean, once consolidated, I imagine there's still gonna be a fair share on there. But at the end of the day, does it take up a whole lot of our time? I don't feel that it does. It's a pretty quick agenda item usually when they do come up. And I don't mind having that little bit of control. I'd rather err on the side of something approaching us and going through planning commission as opposed to just circumventing rules or following a few rules and then being able to go without maybe some more hands-on discussion about it. So I would argue against, but
I'm
No,
not sure I can think of any examples where we wouldn't want to take it to the town board though, but just my thought.
My only concern about that is if, let's say you're a business and you're approaching Wellington and considering where to put your business. If my business and I knew the use for my business fall under conditional use versus this is an approved use that they want to be here, we just have to make sure we follow all the additional steps that they say are required and all the extra rules required for my business to be here. I'd be willing to take that risk. So I'd be willing to do the site plans or buy the property or progress. But if there was a conditional use and I knew that everything I was throwing into this project could potentially just get an axe, even if that's kind of what they wanted, I wouldn't take that risk. I wouldn't pick Wellington. So, but I think the thing is, if we were to do the special, I see it as S under like Larimer County land use plans. We have to be very careful about how we apply that too. So essentially it would say, and we would only apply, in my mind, we would only apply it to things that we absolutely say are acceptable to be there, but require additional buffering or require additional delivery space or require, based on the business use, if it were a brewery, for example. So this is the area that we say we would be welcome to a brewery, but they have to have more setbacks. They have a dedicated delivery space and they have to have screening between all their business neighbors for the extra traffic. That wouldn't be required of any other business in that exact same spot. But because it's a brewery and we say, yes, we are welcome to having breweries there, then they have to do an extra checklist. And I think that extra checklist, if we determine that that would be acceptable, could be handled administratively by staff with the checks of the planning commission. So I don't want any use to be immune to any of the rules. So I think that special to me, it's not like a different category where some people don't have to follow the steps. It's more of we're saying yes to that business and that use, but they have more requirements than anybody else that would also have that same use. So I guess it's how you apply it, maybe is my thought there. So, but the risk thing is, I don't think businesses will take a risk if their use is only conditional in any of those places.
So we've had one conditional use that came to you all, but I know at least in my inbox with different projects, there's been 5 that have either been pulled or pending.
Thanks, Liz.
have you guys brainstormed or just initially started to think about that list of the special requirements if we did decide to add a third category?
we've started at a high level. We wanted to get a temperature read on whether that was desirable or not. And I think we didn't want to exhaust a lot of resources preparing something if it didn't have support. And so we just wanted to start the conversation tonight. But I think certainly heard what the comments were from Commissioner Sarter and McCaffrey on wanting those items to come through a review process. I also think that Commissioner Kinney touched on what we're trying to get to the heart of too, is that in all likelihood, these projects will be coming through a planning commission review. The question would be, does it stop at the planning commission or does it elevate to the board of trustees for that process? So the example might be, like Liz, our planner too, had mentioned that we've been in conversations with a couple of businesses that based on our current code would put them into a conditional use category. And those businesses, in our opinion, most of them would be no issue with that business located in town, but our codes require them to go through this notification process and public hearing process. If the concerns that the planning commission might otherwise have with those applications can be addressed through, if you do this, we want you to do that, then they'd look at it and staff would go, yeah, meet these conditions and you're just in a site plan review. So it'd still come before the planning commission to review, but that conversation with a broker, with a business owner who wants to invest in the town becomes a whole lot different when they say, hey, we're interested in this site. And we can say, yeah, you have a couple of conditions that you have to meet, but your use, would be approved. All you have to do is demonstrate the ability to meet the conditions. That conversation goes a whole lot different than when we respond and say, you're in a conditional use review criteria. A lot of times, as Liz alluded to, they say, you know what, I don't want to mess with that. And so that's what we're trying to help achieve is some consistency, some clarity for a business when they look at a property to know what's allowed, what's not allowed. And if I do business X, I have to meet conditions Y and Z. So that's really where we're trying to go. And I think there is room for an administrative review process. If a business can demonstrate that they've met all of these conditions, then staff may have the ability to approve that to kind of help streamline that business process and approval. And we can define those boundaries really clearly. If the commission wants to go, and ultimately the board, when they review the final recommendations, if that's a desire, we can define really clearly when that's acceptable and when it's not. And if it's not acceptable, what are the conditions and what are the steps that need to be taken to accomplish that business use?
Mr. Byrd, I'd like to weigh in. I would be support. Can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can.
I would be supportive of a truncated review process that maybe there's another path that it doesn't go through the full 9 yards all the way up to the board of trustees, but maybe stops at the planning commission. So I would be willing to explore what that might look like. And again, I mean, certainly we want to have investment in our community and bring in the services folks want. But the question is, at what point does it become not unrealistic burden, but burdensome? So I guess I would be supportive of looking for a new alternative review process.
Thanks, Commissioner Whitehouse. We're all nodding if you can see us.
Great. No, that was great. And I think Cody said it best that, maybe it's not a separate, maybe it's more of an administrative process. And if we bring these standards to you, which is what we're working on right now, and get buy-in from this group and from the board of trustees that those are the right standards and the right mitigation points, then I think we're well on our way to providing staff with the right tools to be able to review these applications. So, okay. So I'd like to go through a few of these uses that are listed in yellow and talk to you about them. And one that I know has come up again and again is the religious land use. So I'd like to hit that one. It's not a combination or anything. We just gave it a new name to encompass all types of places of worship. So religious land use is kind of the way that the planning world goes to try to encompass, churches, synagogues, mosques, everything. So we're not being exclusive of any type of religious land use. And currently your code is kind of reversed of what staff and us feel it probably should be. So we have them as conditional uses in many of the residential zone districts and permitted in the commercial zone districts. And from what we've heard through the comprehensive plan process and from stakeholder interviews throughout the last 2 years is that maybe we reverse that. So we've proposed a reversal of that, showing them permitted in residential zone districts and conditional in 2 of the commercial zone districts. And as Cody said before, we're really trying hard to hone in on what the difference between your C1 community commercial, the C2 downtown core commercial, and C3 mixed use commercial are, because if they all have the same uses, it almost starts to feel like they could be the same character, right? So trying to really look through these different use categories and say, what would make downtown core a little bit different? What uses are appropriate there? And you'll see that's probably the one that has the least amount of permitted and conditional uses, trying to really focus in on the uses that might be appropriate in a downtown core. So anyway, do we like the direction of the religious land use, kind of flopping the permitted versus conditional? Okay.
And just to add just a little bit more to what Jen presented, we have, as a staff, have heard that consistently in Wellington. The churches are feeling like when they're looking for a space to expand their facility and a growing community, their congregations grow as well. When they go out to look for a potential future site and they're limited to the commercial zones, they're paying a much higher price for the same footprint of land that they need for their facility. And it doesn't, our current code doesn't even give them the option of going and negotiating a land deal with a developer to say, can you carve out a 10-acre square of your residential zone that we'd be happy to pay for? It's not even an option available to them right now. So that's one of the biggest considerations that we're looking at, is the forcing it into a commercial category really raises the price for a religious institution to go and acquire land. And we don't want to put them in a position where they're coming back for a conditional review in that category if that's their only option. So allowing religious uses in the residential really seems like the right way to go to help address that need. And I've lived next to a church in the past. They're great neighbors. It's quiet almost all the time, except for, one night and one morning, and that's pretty easy to work around. So we're confident that they're a good fit next to those residential categories.
Do they have to meet HOA guidelines and rules like cases like that?
That's pretty uncommon in my experience. Some of it depends on how the HOA covenants are set up. If those are in place before and the religious institution is acquiring land within the existing covenants, they may have to work through the legal hoops of the HOA covenants or negotiate to remove that piece of land. But it's kind of uncommon to see covenants written for residential uses apply to a commercial use. I have seen it, and usually it results in working through how to remove that commercial or religious property from the residential standards.
So currently, it's not written that way in this table. Is that what I'm seeing?
No, the black line where you see religious land use and then below says churches or place of worship. That churches or place of worship is how you are currently with the conditional uses in residential and permitted in commercial. And then above the line that's yellow, highlighted in yellow with green text, that's what we're proposing to change it to.
Okay, let me just follow this for a minute, because
Yeah.
I don't see where you're putting it in the residential category. Am I reading that wrong? I mean, you're keeping it in, oh man, commercial community, downtown community, commercial. I mean, it's not in R1, R2, or R3.
Yeah, it's a P in R1, R2, R3, and R4 now under the proposed.
Oh, man. I see the yellow.
Is your
Well,
yellow line crooked?
doesn't say anything in there, man. Have a look at it.
Okay, where's the religious line at?
While they're looking at this, I received so much feedback that
worship?
matched the same, so.
In
No,
green?
no, it's under religious. REL.
Get up there then.
And all the,
You are right. that
for the comp plan, all the
That's pretty much a religion now.
sessions I sat
Eyes
in
are a little
on,
bad here, man. Hold on.
that was common feedback in all those groups too, that I
Okay.
participated in.
Oh, there.
See, there's C. P,
Is
P.
this just
I have
applying
been
to
educated.
groups that want to either purchase land or retrofit land to put up a structure of some sort? Because I guess we're just calling it religious land use now, but places of assembly, I know that's going away, but that's extremely broad. So is this going to apply to a group or a church or whatever that wants to just use somebody's outbuilding on 10 acres?
I'm getting old.
So are we going to exclude ag uses from that? Or are we just going to pretty much permit this across the board everywhere?
What we're proposing the religious land use was really referring to any new development, right? So
Okay,
they're
new
they're coming and proposing, we would like to locate a new facility for whatever the religious institution or religious use may be. That's what this is applying to. If it's an existing legal use, it might become non-conforming when we switch from permitted in commercial to permitted in residential. That wouldn't mean that they're not allowed to continue using their facility or making changes to it. This is forward looking for new sites.
Okay.
And to your other question, just for clarification, when you asked about, using a property on a 10-acre site, if it's an outdoor assembly, that's not what we're touching. This is for development of a site.
Okay.
And if it's, we currently have identified as a conditional use in the agricultural district, because the agricultural district is so broad, it could be 10 acres, 35 acres. I mean, there's some practical limitations to how you develop a large piece of property so that it still allows for development of the rest of the property in a way that's consistent with the comprehensive plan. So that conditional factor just allows that additional review to make sure that it's going to fit based on the kind of the master plan for that larger site.
Perfect. Thank you, Cody.
You're welcome.
Find my voice again. Any other questions on that one? I did notice that you have it currently permitted in public. And I would love to know if we should permit it in public zoned. I feel like the public is more for government facilities, education facilities. So that's why I didn't include it right now. But, religious land use should be pretty well allowed in many different zone districts. It's, kind of freedom of speech and that type of thing. So I'm just trying to kind of hone in on that public as well, even though we didn't talk about that one specifically, but just trying to make sure that anything that's zoned public, which I think is very, very little land. So,
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, where is the current public, and somebody can remind me.
Yeah, public is,
Yeah.
yeah, so right now the zoning map is on the wall behind Commissioner Knack. But it's primarily just our parks.
Okay.
And so Centennial Park, Viewpoint Park, those spaces, and I think maybe the town hall is identified as public. But
Okay.
it's currently really only being, and yes, maybe the library and Leaper Center is zoned public. But it's that zone district as it currently exists is really isolated to town-owned properties.
Okay. I'm okay with it not being included.
yeah.
Cemeteries are usually in that public category. Our
Okay.
cemetery is not currently within the town limits. It's in the unincorporated county, but if we annex that someday, we would probably zone that public. Open spaces would be another category that would get zoned public. Typically, if it's perpetual open space that won't be developed or changed, public zoning is usually a good choice for that.
I feel like based on the theme of those other uses that we currently have, that to not include it within public.
Okay,
personally.
perfect.
What if it's a church school?
Expand upon that a little bit, for example, like a Catholic school that's a church and has a school every, Monday through Friday type school. That's a good question.
I can tell you in my experience, typically if it's a church with a school, the school is usually accessory or ancillary to the church use. So the church would be permitted, the school, if it's a separate facility and on the same property, would usually be accessory in my experience. And we can certainly do some more digging on that and see if there's any communities that have done it differently. But I would also make the argument that I think if you look at school or educational uses and church uses, they're probably pretty similar in where we're recommending allowing them. So it may not make a significant difference, but we can certainly investigate further.
Because I'm thinking of like in Loveland Resurrection Fellowship that has elementary through or K through 12. And yet it's part of the same church building too.
Yeah, and Cody's right. We typically try to pair up religious land use with the schools. We like to try to allow them generally in similar zone districts for a variety of reasons, but that being one of them. And a lot of churches have a preschool in them. And I don't think in some cases around here, it's been looked at as a accessory use. It might have a different business license, but the use on the site is, as far as zoning is concerned, is usually the same.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this is Tim Whitehouse. I would be supportive of the changes you recommend in the land use code for the religious land use. It does seem like it's a little backwards. It seems like has caused a little bit of burden with some of the religious organizations here. So that seems to make sense. And I would also concur with Commissioner Kinney regarding, is it in the public? And I would say I would agree with her that I guess it is not, or yeah. Could you hear me, Bert?
Part of it.
Okay, I'll try better.
There you go. Thank you.
Awesome. There was one other use I wanted to kind of talk through because it was a big conglomeration, the industrial and manufacturing light. So there were a lot of different uses that have gone into that category. As you can see over in the current permitted uses, there a good deal of them are permitted in industrial right now. And then there's some inconsistency in light industrial. They're primarily conditional with one permitted. And then conditional in the mixed use, but they include, your production and assembly, packaging, fabrication. You're going to see a lot of repetition in here where in your current code, you just kind of state the same thing kind of in a different way a couple of times. Manufacturing of electric or electronic instruments, preparing of food products, packaging. So you're kind of seeing a theme here, plumbing, electrical, and carpenter shops. So we've combined all of that into one use of basically light industrial and manufacturing. If we need to peel any of these out and be a little more specific, sometimes food production or manufacturing and providing food products can be a little bit different than your welding and electrical type uses. So that's the only one right now that I would say we could peel that one back out and have food production as a separate item. But other than that, when we were looking at this, these all seemed similar enough that we can use the definition, the revised definition, to really explain kind of what these uses are that we're looking at. And you can see we've shown them as proposed for permitted in industrial and in light industrial. And that's where the tricky part comes in with the definition really specifying the difference between what's a light industrial versus industrial use. So any thoughts on that one? I know, again, you might need to kind of stare at this a little bit and really weigh in more at our next meeting, but that was another one I wanted to kind of put forward to put some thought into and see if we've gone too far, condensed it too far, if we need to break it out a little bit more. So yeah. You like it?
I don't really know.
Yeah, some of these take some thought, and even when we look through these, I was telling Cody, we were talking last week, and I always take kind of a first flush and then I have to set it aside for a couple of days. And then I pull it open again and look at it with fresh eyes and go, well, now maybe that one doesn't work there. And let's think through some scenarios. And we think through applications that the town has received on certain uses and try to piece it all together. And no doubt this will change over the next couple of months with working with you all and staff, but we wanted to kind of get our first ideas out there to see,
I
you
can see
know,
where
where-
food products could be a little bit different. but
Sure.
then again, I can see where it maybe isn't different at
it's
all.
really not different. Yeah.
It's-
And what it really comes down to is those standards, you know, if we start to develop the standards for light industrial and we find it's the same for food production as it is for electric and plumbing, then maybe it's good to keep it together. So.
Would kind of be based off things that we review, you know, traffic
Mhm.
impacts. and
Exactly.
Smells and light pollution and that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
I can see food maybe needing to be broken out,
Mhm.
especially if it's preparation from scratch, if there's industrial cooking or
Right.
boiling or anything that needs high ventilation. Maybe that's not quite the same as running a carpentry shop.
Dog
Mhm.
food plant. I don't know.
And some of that comes down to footprint required to accommodate the full range of services that business is offering. Just as Commissioner Sarter was saying, and even McCaffrey's example with a dog food plant, that takes up a much bigger footprint than is available in some of the light industrial properties that we see developed. And so it may just naturally push those categories into a different use based on their site needs.
And we've actually divided it up by size of building before. So if it's a light industrial, technically a light industrial use, but it's over, say, a 3,000 square foot building, then it kicks you up to a heavy industrial use, even if the use itself might be light industrial. To Cody's point, if the facility needs a bigger site, we can write that into the standards that gets kicked up to the heavy industrial.
And another example that I've run into in other communities in my past is, microbrewery with a canning facility. They're a good fit for a light industrial district. Neither one of those processes is particularly burdensome by themselves. But what we ran into was when that business became successful, they started seeing a much higher volume of production. They had more trucks with more materials coming in. They had more trucks going out. It became, the impacts of that growing business became much more than that district was really intended for. And so what we ended up doing, not to impact that business, but for any future businesses of a similar nature, we identified categories for if you're producing this much volume or this many barrels of beer, or if you're, just a couple of other categories, defining if you're within these limits, you're okay to be in the light industrial district because it's generally supported for that volume or that intensity of operations. But once you exceed that threshold, that type of use is an industrial district because of your impact to the surrounding environs and your operational needs.
So in that new coding, would they have to move then?
Typically, that would come down to an enforcement issue. If you're approved as an existing facility, or if you have a new facility that you're citing, and you understand that the zoning allows up to this limit, you have to operate within that limit. If you exceed that limit, we're having a different conversation. It looks like it's time for your business to grow. Where can we help you grow within the town on a piece of property that's appropriate for your long-term needs? And we love having those conversations with businesses. Have you thought about your future expansion? Do you have a big enough site for your business when it becomes very successful? Do you have room to grow? Usually they look at us and go, "You planners." But we love asking that question because that's a big concern. We don't like businesses to have to relocate for being short-sighted on their operational needs.
Great. Well, I'm looking at the clock and I don't know. Oh, we still have time. That clock is off.
It's 2 minutes ahead.
I was getting a little worried. I was like, I don't want to run too close to your next meeting. So those were the two big ones I just wanted to bring your attention to so that you can kind of start thinking through these and talk in more detail at our next meeting. I think we have quite a bit more time planned for the next meeting. So we can really dive in and bring up scenarios and talk through this. But are there any others that, when you first got the document, you opened, they struck a chord and you wanted to bring them up tonight, or do you want to defer that to our next conversation?
I'm curious about something. I'm looking on page 16 and it's motor vehicle repair heavy and below it motor vehicle repair light. And I see the only difference is major repairs versus minor repairs. But what are you defining there? Because I know that one of the places here in town that repairs cars, rebuilds engines and transmissions, is that a major or minor repair? Versus lights and wiper blades and brake drums and things like that.
Yeah, so that'll come down to the definitions. And this is another one that, you know, maybe we condense it even further. Maybe it's most appropriate to just say motor vehicle repair and not identify the heavy versus light. Because then you do get into splitting hairs a little bit. But the way we have the definition right now, heavy includes straightening of body parts, body repair, battery rebuilding, painting, welding, short-term storage of automobiles. Light includes brake repair, car washing, detailing, polishing, replacement of filters, fluids, light bulbs, belts, fuses, oils, and tires, and emission testing. So that might be a great one that we condense even further, because that is a lot of automotive companies do all of the above. So
Yeah, and I think that we're definitely interested in hearing thoughts and perspective on this, especially Commissioner Friedrichs and your background in the automotive and Canac as well. You guys have a really great sense for what the operational needs are for some of those activities. Traditionally, the way I've seen this split came down to what are the processes happening on site? So what were the noise impacts? Are you hearing a lot of torque wrenches and deep engine repair and throttling the engine to figure out, diagnose a problem, versus the more retail side of things? I'm here to buy a part. I'm in and out in 20 minutes, and maybe I put it together in the parking lot and put it on there and it takes an hour, but it's usually single trip. Vehicles are operable, not inoperable. And there's no additional requirements for, painting is listed specifically because that requires a paint booth and a specific HVAC system for ventilation that's different than a retail use where you're maybe changing tires. So those are the kind of common distinctions that I've seen, and that outdoor storage component is huge. If a vehicle is going to be parked and waiting for several days for parts to arrive, or it's in inoperable condition or a wrecked vehicle, those are typically not in that light category where it's highly visible in area or in a corridor that's specific for like a retail, dining and entertainment type of district. So those are the common distinctions that I've seen in codes over the years.
I also think it has something to do with the axles and the tonnage.
That's a great point.
You know,
Semis and trailers.
You don't want,
not be light.
a repair shop down the street that is doing, your semi trucks and trailers. Because one, our streets aren't built for that anyways. So, that would have to be, I would see a truck repair, diesel repair being more heavy commercial, where you've got your cars and your, cars and pickups.
So right now, we only have 2 locations for those kind of services. And that's not, that's not our current land use map. I mean, that's an old one, right?
The map on the wall that the mayor is referring to is our current zoning map. Not to be confused with the future land use map in the comprehensive plan.
Right, but we really don't have a whole lot. I mean, this is a needed service in town a lot of times, or for other things too, tires, whatever, that sort of thing. We really kind of cut ourselves short by not letting us do light industrial, didn't we?
Well, and keep in mind, it's associated, currently as we've got it defined, it's associated with the repair component. And so just by example, a Napa, an O'Reilly Auto Parts, Discount Tire, Peerless Tire, Schwab, those are, or Schwab, is that right?
Yeah,
Am I-
that's Schwab.
Okay, I was thinking of the financial institution. But those types of uses are generally fall into the retail category that would be consistent with your C3 highway commercial zone. I had a commission in the past on a Discount Tire proposal that went round and round on that very subject. They said, it feels like this could be a retail storefront because all they're really doing is displaying tires. It was all completely inside the building. It matched what our zoning code said, but they said, but we're concerned about these overhead doors, and they're going in and changing tires, and you can hear the torque wrenches and the air compressors running and whatnot. And what it came down to was they found a way to mitigate those concerns. They said, we've got our operation set up such that the doors will be closed if at all possible when we're operating on, a vehicle. They had an outdoor storage for their, the used tires that was completely screened and enclosed. And ultimately it got approved as a retail setting, which is what you see many of those types of businesses, Peerless, Discount Tire, Schwab, Big O tires. I mean, those are typically in a retail setting. Which
So
is
like our Grease Monkey or the lube stop, is that retail then?
that one would be a tough one because there's not much retail involved there. They're not, and I haven't actually used that facility. So I don't know if they've got much for sale, like wiper blades and things of that nature, if it's just the service component. But if it's just the service component, then it might be closer to one of the definitions that we've used currently.
They sell oil and filters and windshield wiper blades, and then they install it all. So there's a service component to it also. And there's also three automotive repair facilities in the industrial park and a heavy truck over 26,000 pounds.
So knowing that, this might be a great category to look at performance standards based on the zone district, where maybe that type of the light service might be allowed as a permitted use in multiple commercial categories. But if it's in a commercial category next to a residential zone district, then it has to provide a landscape buffer and screening to be compliant. And that can be defined in a way that the expectations are clear that if you're doing these types of operations associated with that retail use, you need to have these things in place to mitigate those impacts on your neighbors. But it could still be a use by right where they're coming in with a site plan application and that's it. It doesn't have to go through a conditional use or other process. Just if you've met all the criteria and requirements, Planning Commission can approve a site plan.
I'll just say, just to kind of keep it aware of just our current, where we're at currently. I'm not sure that it would be, we'd have to watch, like light industrial is obviously where Vesey is now, the funeral home. So we'd want to be a little mindful of even that situation. So he probably doesn't want a hot rod shop coming in next door to the funeral home. But
Good point.
Is a funeral
We don't
home
have a
light
funeral home.
industrial?
it's not, it's
I know where it is. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
it
that's
is.
it's another great example. I've seen a lot of funeral parlors that are located in or next to residential zone districts. And generally speaking, they're pretty reasonable for that type of a setting. I think the biggest component for this Vesey services here in town is the crematory,
Yeah.
right, which would not be appropriate
Got it.
in a residential setting.
All right.
And again, that's a good question. Do we list those separately? Is it funeral services, with crematory, without crematory? Or do you list it as funeral services if you have crematorium or other components, then here's these things that you have to meet? All great questions.
Mhm. And that was a great conversation just now about the motor vehicle. I think I've taken away some really great notes here on how we might want to refine those uses a little bit to be more specific.
If there are other
Great.
questions that I can answer at a
Okay.
different time, please let me know.
Okay, absolutely. Will do.
We good?
Well,
I think we're out of time.
I think we're out of time, so.
My suggestion would be, and thanks, Jen, we appreciate your time this evening.
Yeah, thank you guys.
My suggestion would be, if you think of other questions or have comments or thoughts, email those to me. And our team will continue to work on this behind the scenes and we can bring back an update at the next meeting. In December, we currently only have one agenda item anticipated for that agenda, and the timeline for required notifications is passed. So we really kind of anticipate having some more time at that meeting to get a little bit deeper in this. So our proposal currently is going to be to do our work session at 5:30, conduct the business on that application, and then adjourn and reconvene in work session for a little bit longer to drill down on some of these topics.
Let's take a quick 5-minute break, guys.
Thank you.
Put these glasses so you can see workshop doesn't say worship.
You mentioned that. Feel free to pick and choose if there is anything there. And you, last time we spoke, you had said you didn't need anything.
No, most of the time I'm eating protein drinks
Okay.
or drinking protein drinks.
Well, if there's anything that works for you, feel free to help yourself. But I remembered our conversation.
Yeah,
from
I
last time.
just didn't want you to spend money on me.
Oh, no.
Okay,
Believe me, it doesn't go to waste. Someone's gonna eat it all.
okay, that's fine.
Thanks.
Are we waiting until after tomorrow's results to add another line item?
Yeah. we specifically did.
Figured.
We have some time to work on it.
Yeah. I thought about bringing it up. Like I had to figure out why bother talking about it.
Yeah. No,
Worship versus workshop.
With my screen, it was so small. When I first glanced at it, I thought I was not ready to bring up the fact, you guys notice that worship is really in different places. No, like that's okay. You and I both seen it at the same time. Started laughing. Oh, funny.
That's okay, huh?
Well,
Did you figure out what to do with?
Well, Mark is not muted, the button is red.
Martin's like, I'm doing good.
I am now.
all right. Call the regular planning commission meeting to order, November 1st, 2021. Call to order, please, or excuse me, roll call, please.
Commissioner Whitehouse,
Here.
Kinney, Present.
Here.
Knack,
Here.
Sarter,
Here.
Fredericks. McCaffrey.
Here. All right. Additions or deletions from the agenda?
None tonight.
Public forum, public's invited to speak on something that's not on the agenda. All right, no one, we'll skip past there. Consideration of minutes. Do we have a motion to approve minutes from last meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting from the minutes from the October meeting.
I can second.
Knack seconded. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Whitehouse,
Yes.
Keeney,
Yes.
Hammond,
Yes.
Knack, Sarter,
Yes.
Fredericks,
Yes.
McCaffrey.
Yes. This is cool. We hear each other really good. All right, site plan, new business site plan review, lot 2B, block 1, Boxelder Commons. Is that Mr. Bird or is that? All
That's
right,
me.
fire away.
I have to share my screen. Give me 1 second.
Nope. Nope.
Okay. Hi, everyone. The first agenda item is to talk about the site plan review for Lot 2B, Block 1, Boxelder Commons. It's a multi-tenant mixed-use space, and the applicant is FR Development, and their agent is Northern. They've got some representatives here. If folks have questions for them, they're available. This is the general location of where this development is planned to go. Oops, sorry. So you can see it's just a wee bit south of Ridley's and is just north of where the Ziggy's is. A little bit of background information. The tenants are currently unidentified. So they're doing a core and shell, which is just creating the building and finding the tenants later. It's zoned C3 highway commercial. All of the proposed uses that are being used for their calculations are permitted in that zone district. They have a desire to have 2 restaurants and 1 retail establishment, and the square footage is presented there for you. It's a little bit funny if you do the math. The restaurant space includes a rooftop deck, so it's not just for like the frontage. So that's something that's important to note. And the current application is seeking approval for the site plan for this multi-tenant mixed-use building. Just a quick overview. Staff doesn't have any major concerns about the site. It has been reviewed by engineering as well as by Wellington Fire Protection District. And Everett is here if anybody has questions for fire. The parking count is under the minimum required, and the applicant has posed a solution that was provided in the staff report. The applicant is also requesting to go over the sign code allowance, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. 1 drive aisle on the east side of the building is only 21 feet. The applicant already received approval for a variance from Wellington Fire Protection District, and staff agrees that this would be acceptable. There's some minor lighting concerns, and then there's some minor edits and information that needed to be clarified. That's all outlined in the staff report. So the parking is the first thing to chat about. In the staff report, you can see that they provided 2 different charts. The first is for the current proposal, and the second is like a future proposal, but that's not under consideration. It's just for demonstration, mostly an acknowledgement that the applicant understands that they're, by using the parking spaces for the current proposed uses, that they may have to limit their future uses, and that it likely requires going after a shared parking agreement with the other businesses that are right there to be able to create more uses in the future. So again, that future proposed chart isn't under consideration tonight. It's just to demonstrate that it's been thought about, and this is the direction that they would like to go. At the conceptual review that we did with the applicant, staff asked for some greater amenities for walking and bicycling that were reflected in the proposal that you're seeing tonight. Additionally, we asked for the parking analysis, which is the charts that we received. And the applicant chose to use more of like a worst case scenario for the use mix, to demonstrate that in the event that both restaurants were to be occupied, that they do have enough available parking between the sites that they own to be able to accommodate that. And so some of the walking and bicycling amenities that they added, just to highlight these, they proposed a mid-block crossing across Fifth that would connect onto their site, provided some more bicycle racks above what the minimum requires. And they're also extending the sidewalk, kind of traversing through where it's like the middle site between where this proposal is and where the Dollar General is, as additional safety for folks who are walking or going across the developments before that middle spot gets developed. The parking analysis, again, I just kind of went over this, but it's that the charts that are presented in the staff report. And if there's any questions about that, I'm happy to help answer, or I think their applicant is able to do that as well. Just want to make sure there's nothing else on that. I think I already covered all of this. Sorry for being out of order. The signage, so at the direction of staff, the applicant was encouraged to pose potential locations and square footage for the signage for the future tenants that are currently unknown. So they proposed wall sign square footage as well as hypothetical placement for where those would be. And they're proposing a monument sign near their entrance. They're currently requesting to go over the square footage allowed by the code. So that's something to talk about tonight. And then here's some photos of where they identified that the signage could go. I know that it's small. It's laid out in your staff report with what the frontages are, but the scale is relatively appropriate, which is really the square footage allotments are to try to make it so that you don't have a giant sign on a small building. So that's a question for you all to answer tonight, if you would like them to strictly meet the code or if this seems appropriate for the development that they're posing. The monument sign, they provided a rendering of what it'll look like. And then the location, as you can see, is near the entrance. And then the east aisle, like I stated earlier, it's 21 feet. This is something that varies from Wellington Fire Protection's district standards, and they have already received a variance for that. And then staff additionally has recommended that the applicant look at the MUTCD, which is the requirements for traffic control, to determine if there's a need for additional pavement or signs to designate that as a one-way drive. Some of the lighting questions, one of them is just if there's going to be lighting for the monument sign, and if that needs to then be calculated into the photometrics. There are some over maximums on the west side that are highlighted there. This is something that we had discussed previously with this applicant when they were doing the larger development for the site in 2019 or 2020, I think. And then additionally with Dollar General, it's a little bit over, but it actually provides greater safety for folks who are using the sidewalk, since there's not road lights on Fifth Street. So staff sees this as an acceptable overage. And then the parking entrance is a little bit below the minimum, and staff would like to see that be reevaluated. Additionally, there's a little bit of overspill with the lighting to the north of their property line where the future parking lot will be. as well as to the east, which is a drainage way. I think it's a floodway. So it's not really negatively impacting an adjacent use. And there's some dark lighting conditions by the trash enclosure. And furthermore, on that east parking lot that staff would like to see addressed. The staff assessment and recommendation, like I said, there's a couple of minor concerns that we just kind of outlined. And for the most part, the minimums are met or can be met with some minor edits to the site plan. Staff would request to approve any additional changes administratively so they don't have to return to the planning commission unless there's something really major that we're not seeing that you all want them to return for. So we would recommend approving the site plan for this pending final engineering review and comments being addressed. And that's it for me. Do you all have any questions for the applicant or for me?
When do we see the parking ideas?
The chart.
Yeah.
Would you like me to pull it up so you can review it again?
I didn't, was it there? I didn't see it.
Is the charts in the staff report?
It's in
And
this.
it's not in the presentation slides. If you have it, we might be able to pull.
I have it.
I'm looking at it.
How tall is that monument sign?
It's 7 feet.
And it's that curve.
It's curved. Yes,
If I may, in an effort to save a moment.
sure. Could you please come up and use the microphone? This is Andrew.
Hi there,
How you
Andrew
doing,
Roush, representing FR this evening. We've actually changed gears just slightly with this building, and we've opted to remove the roof deck off of this model. By doing so, that has greatly increased our parking, and we've actually provided new calculations that Shane's gonna.
Yeah, so I'm Shane
elaborate
with
on.
Northern Engineering. I'm the civil on this project. And I can kind of walk through the old calculations and kind of explain what's going on there and then give you an update based on the new after the decision's been made to eliminate the roof deck. But the short of it really is that the piece of ground that FR owns intends, it's intended to have another building between this one and the Dollar General to the north. So in the current configuration as part of the packet with the roof deck, they'd be essentially taking away some of that potential future parking for the building in between. And so the second part of the table, the possible future square footage, all that's laying out is if you had a 3,900 square foot restaurant, you'd have enough parking. But the idea would be to get a parking agreement between Ziggy's and Dollar General to utilize all the parking in the area for, like basically a cross parking agreement. Now that the roof deck has been removed, it's a pretty substantial reduction in the total number of parking spots. And so the possible size of a future building could be increased. But in the parking spots that are provided on this site plan for this development, they're actually overparked by about 6 spots, as opposed to being short 23. So it's a big reduction.
How big was that? Yeah.
Quite large, 2,500 square feet.
Yeah. So, I think the good news is that either way, there was still additional parking for that future building. It still is something that's going to be considered to have a shared parking agreement for the future building and really utilize all the parking in the area to its fullest extent. But for the short term, I mean, it's pretty well parked now.
So are you removing the roof deck to satisfy the parking?
Well, we just didn't want to hamstring that next building. And so by doing the roof deck, we'd be limiting the size of building we could do in between Dollar General and the current proposed project, which then limits users and restaurant potential users and things like that. So although it would have been a cool feature,
Yeah.
it was a cost reduction.
Yeah.
And then also, we might get a better building out of it in between. It also, satisfies our parking issue, which at this current moment is pretty large. We're down 23 spots. So this was kind of a win for everybody.
But it's not the driving factor for you to reconfigure this building, is it?
Not necessarily, no. I think cost is a big one.
Okay.
I
all
think finding an end user for that space would be difficult
right, okay.
in this market.
I've got a question, maybe more for Liz and Cody. Are the neighborhood streets in Harvest Village across from Fifth applicable as off-street parking? And if they're not, why not? Because we were counting that for the Wellington Muni building here as, we're counting T-bar parking as municipal lot parking. And it's significantly further away than walking across Fifth would be.
Yeah, and I can field that too, Liz. It's a good question. The example you mentioned for the town facility and sharing the T-bar parking lot was identified by staff in cooperation with the owner of the T-bar to possibly improve that lot for a dual purpose. And it's within 700 feet of the town facility, which our code allows for the off-street parking to be within 700 feet. The big difference is that's still off-street. The on-street component in the residential districts would be a detriment to the residential properties, and that's why that's typically not identified as a permissible way to address the off-street parking requirement.
Okay.
Andrew just handed me some paperwork that's now in Bert's hands. It's the proposal that is in the staff report, as well as the new calculations that they were just speaking of. So you all can take a look at it.
Is there a way to summarize that, Liz? Do you have like the rough numbers? Or was it what Shane and Andrew had just shared?
It's what they just shared.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we captured it for anyone listening and for trustee Whitehouse who's not here.
So they were underparked before by 23. Now they're overparked by 6.
Yes. Here's another copy. Thank you.
You mind using the microphone if you could, please? Thanks, Khalil.
My name is Khalil. I'm with Hauser Architects, architect on the project.
Get it closer to the microphone and say that same thing.
My name's Khalil. I work with Hauser Architects. I'm the architect for the project. And I'd just like to say that we have not changed the architecture of the building from what you have seen. The towers and everything is to remain the same. It's very, very minimal changes that we'll be making. So just so you understand, the renderings and the exterior look of the building will not be changing significantly at all.
I actually do have a question because I was looking at the plan and that stairwell
Yep.
that goes whoop, whoop.
This exterior stairwell will be removed.
Okay, you did just say that. Okay.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Is there an option to create that in the future? Like if what the next building looks like and you have, depending on the tenants, to be able to open that up?
The future
future?
project has not been defined at this point, so that's completely up to FR Properties.
Absolutely, if the market drives some of that, absolutely we'll entertain that.
Andrew, I'm sorry. Do you mind using the microphone just because we've got audience off-site?
Sorry, if we're getting good demand for that next building and next project, we'll certainly consider that. But we want to make sure we're setting ourselves up for success with this first building. Does that answer your question?
Thanks, Andrew.
We all want a rooftop, is what
Yeah.
we're saying. I'd love to do that.
Well,
Are there
this
any
is,
further questions for me or for the applicant?
I had a comment. It's Commissioner Whitehouse.
Oh, there you
Yes.
are.
There I am. Can you hear me now, Bert?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the applicant looking at the parking situation and making adjustments to satisfy that and also look down the road as to what potential impacts are going to be to future development. So I think that's prudent. So I just wanted to add that comment. So thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So the lighting, I mean, we always knew Fifth Avenue, Fifth Street was a nightmare there because of no lighting. So this new lighting setup will handle that without blinding the people who live next door.
Yeah, they're using a similar photometric plan to what the Dollar General did. So it'll light the sidewalk just a little bit. So it goes over what our codes maximums would be for the property line, but it's actually in support of people walking. And then it should be pretty dim by the center line of the road.
Thank you.
So
And Chairman
I had a,
McCaffrey-
Yes.
I had a street light question, which, when that was put in, the street lights were not put in for whatever reason. Was there any discussion with the applicant about adding that, or has there been any discussion about that?
I can respond to that. Thanks, Commissioner Whitehouse. And that's where I was going to make a comment. As a reminder, that was something that was flagged on when actually it was FR when they brought the Dollar General site plan to us before Dollar General was identified. That same comment came up, and staff's concern was there were no streetlights along Fifth Street. It was a dark corridor. We asked them at that time if they could either put in streetlights or what was ultimately agreed to was to position the parking lot lightings in a manner that would allow some of that light from the parking lot lighting to illuminate the sidewalk areas. And so that was accomplished for the Dollar General site, and that's what the site plans for tonight show as well. So, and then to the question just a moment ago about street lighting and glare to the neighbors, it's staff's belief that this approach would actually be less of an impact than a street light that would be located right on Fifth Street. There creates a little bit more separation. There's still the directionally downward lights. So we feel like this was a really good compromise in working with the applicants in their site plan review process to fill the need in a way that makes sense for the current conditions.
So that lighting go all the way along Fifth Street, or will it be missing something in the middle where there isn't gonna be a building yet?
Missing something in the middle where there's not a building yet.
Okay,
But with an opportunity to fill that
sure.
gap in the future.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah, the,
You read it right.
Anybody else having questions?
You mentioned underlighting kind of right where the monument sign looks like it's gonna be. It looks like there's on the photometric plan, there is a light station there, but it's a single. Could we just make that a double? I probably run into the same problem. You'll overlight the entrance where those turn lanes out are, but is that necessarily an issue if Ziggy's is right there and we're just illuminating the corner a little bit more?
yeah, so that's, the staff comment is to reevaluate what that would look like. So their photometrics engineer, whomever can look at that and figure out what the best solution is.
So there was a question about changes to the signage standards, and do we need to address that as well at this point?
If you have questions about it, I'm happy to answer, but I think it's more of like a discussion item for you all. So it could be now or it could be soon.
And
Okay.
this is Cody Bird, Planning Director. Appreciate that question. And Liz has a great response. I think it would be worth discussing tonight what the applicant is proposing. They don't have tenants identified yet. I'm reiterating some of the things that are in the staff report just for anyone tuning in the audience. But the applicant hasn't identified tenants yet for who might fill some of these commercial spaces. What they've asked for is consideration of an overall sign plan for each of those spaces with a location and square footage identified. It's a little bit, the square footage proposed is a little bit higher than what our code allows. And staff's recommendation in the staff report was, even though it's a little bit higher, it feels like it's a pretty appropriate scale for the type and size of development that's being proposed. And so staff's recommendation was that we support an overall increase to the sign sizes proposed in this concept sign plan based on the scale and intensity of the proposed project site.
I was going to say, looking at the renderings, I would be supportive of that change in the staff recommendations. I mean, it's pretty clearly laid out on their site, on their elevations of their building that where they're going to go, and it all seems appropriate.
Any other questions?
Is it just the building mounted signs or is it the monument sign as well that's over?
So the code, the way that the code looks at it is with the monument sign and the wall sign together. Yeah.
So it's
So the monument sign square footage is 50 square feet. And then, and I put the staff report up on there. So the monument sign would be 50 square feet. And then each of the tenants has a square footage that is appropriate to the scale of the building, which is really the intent behind the code. But it is over what the code maximum would be.
And keeping in mind too, just as, I know that the commissioners are familiar with the site, but I'll state it for the record too. The building proposed will have a frontage on almost four sides, or at least potentially four sides. So the frontage road visibility, they're requesting signs there as well as on the Fifth Street side. So it's really got two fronts, and then there's the end units as well that may want to use signage on the end cap. So you essentially have four-sided architecture for this site, and the applicant is requesting some degree of signage options for those tenants on all four sides.
I think that makes sense.
Intent of the sign code. I like that.
Yes.
Really to regulate the size of it in relationship to the frontage.
Right.
And it's like a scale. So if it feels good and it looks good, it meets the intent.
Any other questions? All right, no more questions here. We'll close this part of the meeting and open it to the public. Anyone in the public wish to speak about this project? Going once, going twice. Back to the directors. All right, any more questions, guys? Any more discussion?
I
We have
love
a
it.
motion.
Disappointed that they were gonna take the
Yeah.
roof off.
Knew that was coming.
Restaurant I used to frequent that served really great Mexican food, and you could sit up on the roof and look at the Catholic church from the 1830s across the street and drink
That
your
steamboat?
margaritas.
All right, we digress.
Yes.
I move to approve the site plan for Lot 2B, Block 1, Boxelder Commons, subject to the staff report comments and engineering review comments.
Okay.
Second, all right, roll call, please.
Commissioner Whitehouse,
Yes.
Kenny,
Yes.
Hammond,
Yes.
Knack,
Yes.
Sarter,
Yes.
Fredericks,
Yes.
McCaffrey.
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you, guys. Great presentation. Thanks for meeting everything we needed on there. Thanks. All right, moving on. B, site plan review, lot 6 and 7 Meridian First Subdivision, multi-tenant mixed use. Who has that one?
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
As they're shuffling out, I just realized I was all prepared to share the slide presentation for this next item, and I hadn't tuned into the Zoom meeting to do that. So give me just a minute while we
See you, Mr. Whitehouse.
iron that out.
Did you hear that, Tim?
Tim, you're out.
You can't present the next slide with you here, with you on Zoom.
No, it's not.
No, I don't think that's what he said, Bert.
Trying to get rid of you.
Yeah, my apologies. I'm loading it up right now as we speak here. It certainly is a convenience until it's not, and then we sort it out. If you can promote me to
Recording in progress.
presenter. There we go. So while we're getting started for the presentation here, I'll go ahead and get started and just give the commission a quick reminder. This is partially in the presentation here, but the applicant for this project is Fawad Faor, and the application is for a site plan review of Lot 6 and Lot 7 Meridian First Subdivision. Oh, picked the wrong view. Sorry, guys, my apologies. Which one is that? Oh, perfect. The one with the icon. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, whew, now we're under control. So as a reminder, the site plan application for lot 6 and lot 7, Meridian First Subdivision, was originally presented to the Planning Commission at the October meeting. And after some discussion and dialogue on the site application, ultimately the Planning Commission tabled that item to tonight's meeting. So you've seen this site plan before. It is for a multi-use, multi-tenant commercial project located in the Meridian First subdivision. And here's your site plan. It's along the Highway 1 frontage, close to Meridian First Credit Union. Just some quick background as a reminder, the property is zone C3 highway commercial, which is appropriate for this type of multi-tenant commercial space. The proposed mix of uses, if you remember from the last October meeting, there were some questions about what types of uses were proposed and how much square footage as it related to some of the parking count considerations. And at that October meeting, the applicant indicated that he and his team would evaluate the proposed uses and the square footage to make sure that they stayed under the available parking for the site based on the site plan that they'd laid out. And the square footage that is proposed is 4,000 square feet of restaurant space, 6,200 square feet of retail space, and 3,965 square feet of office space. That equals the total square footage for the proposed building as part of the site plan. And generally, if adhered to, could come close to meeting the parking available on site with some additional off-street parking with a shared parking lot agreement. As a reminder, these are on private roadways. There's a looped road through the subdivision that's currently exists. It was constructed with the bank's development of the site. And those are private drives. And this is a little under 2 acres in size for the 2 lots being considered. As I mentioned, the decision at the October meeting was to table this site plan till tonight to allow the applicant some time to address some of the discussion and comments from the October meeting. The applicant has resubmitted the site plans for this project, and staff has reviewed it and updated. We've basically just updated the staff report from the October meeting so we didn't lose the comments that were included originally. So we've updated that. And many of the items were discussed or were addressed, excuse me. Some of the items didn't get addressed. A lot of them appear to be pretty minor, but just haven't been updated on the site plans. And we didn't really get a written response from the applicant indicating why those items were or were not addressed. So we weren't really sure exactly what the intent was. But as we've received those site plans in the condition that they are, it appears that there are still some items that haven't quite been addressed to the fullest extent. So what staff has recommended, we really do feel like some of the items that are remaining could be addressed by working with the applicant and staff. We support approval of the site, approval of the site plan, but we also acknowledge that there's some corrections and things that need to be cleaned up and resubmitted for staff level review. So our recommended motion was to approve the site plans subject to meeting those conditions and criteria and resubmitting those plans for staff to review. Be happy to stand for any questions.
Well, Mr. Byrd, their proposed solution for their over parking situation is not a permanent solution because it's not an easement. So in my mind, they have not solved their parking issues.
Thanks, Commissioner Whitehouse. And just to elaborate a little bit for audience and anyone tuning in from home, the applicant was requested to evaluate off-site parking options with adjacent property owners and find a shared parking arrangement. What was presented, and it's included in the packet, is a lease agreement with Meridian First Credit Union. And that parking agreement is basically a lease saying that you have access to these parking spaces, but there's some subject determination clause language that really doesn't make that a long-term parking solution, whereas similar to other planning commission items that have been presented recently, an off-site parking easement has been required to ensure that both lots are encumbered by that shared parking agreement. So something of that nature would be more appropriate, and staff is happy to help facilitate with some language that could be used to create an arrangement like that with one of the adjacent property owners.
That would be something that would be recorded at the county then?
Correct. That's the way the shared parking arrangements or joint access and shared parking are typically handled is you write up the terms and conditions in a page or two, both parties sign it and it gets recorded. So it would show as an encumbrance against both those lots that way, if a property sells, the new owner doesn't just get to wipe the slate clean and say, I'm not going to work with you. They'd have to get agreement from both parties and town approval to vacate that parking easement.
And staff can take care of that part with the.
Yeah,
applicant?
we'll be happy to help with that process. I mean, obviously, it still requires the two property owners to communicate and find agreement and sign those documents. But staff is happy to help facilitate that process.
Any other questions?
Can you summarize more of the outstanding items? Just walk me through that, please.
Yeah, so I'll go back to the staff report here. But the items that were identified in the October 4th staff report, and honestly, it kind of looks like the changes that were made by the applicant addressed a lot of the discussion at the planning commission meeting, where the commission provided guidance and feedback on the staff report. And the other written comments in the staff report didn't get addressed or reflected fully. So those were the items that were highlighted. Sorry, this is scrolling forever. A little faster. And so in the staff report, the items that hadn't been completely addressed or identified in bold. And so just kind of working through the list, the parking we talked about with the total parking spaces, so they're still a little bit short. And then the parking arrangement that we just discussed satisfied some of the parking dimensional requirements that were identified at the last planning commission meeting. There was a suggestion from the staff that if the parking counts weren't completely satisfied, it would be at least a step in the right direction to provide additional bicycle parking to help reduce the demand on the parking lot. And we didn't get a response, which doesn't mean the applicant isn't willing to do it. We just don't have a set of site plans that show the intent. Circulation aisles was largely addressed, and a lot of the concerns were on the parking and circulation. There were some staff comments relative to loading and unloading areas, which the planning commission did provide guidance on, and so that those didn't need to be required. ADA, this is a pretty big concern from ADA is a federal, Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal requirement, and there's just not enough information on the site plan to evaluate if it's been satisfied. One of the comments in the last report was that there was a conflict with a parking lot island and the curb ramp for ADA, that they conflicted. The response from the applicant in the drawing, one sheet of the drawing was updated to show those flares being shortened to meet the space requirements, but the shortening of those flares to 2 feet, which was suggested, doesn't comply with the, well, we don't have the slopes or the elevations of that curb to know exactly, but a 6-inch curb with a 2-foot wide flare results in 3 inches of rise per foot, which is more than double what the ADA code allows. And so there's still a conflict there with ADA that needs to be addressed, and we just don't have site plans currently that show show compliance with the ADA requirements. Sorry, you asked for a summary and I didn't have a list prepared.
No, it's okay. I'm just reading through it. So if you have any comments as we go through it, it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So many of the comments regarding signage, I believe, was addressed. They did propose a monument sign that was requested that they identify location for that, and the location largely works. Lighting plan didn't include any consideration for the wall packs on the architectural elevations page. Probably the assumption, right or wrong, it appears as though the lighting consultant was contracted to do the parking lot lighting and didn't include any of the architectural lighting. So there's maybe just a disconnect there that needs to be clarified on the photometric plans. Light pole locations with tree locations was talked about. I think there was a general understanding that that was a concern, but we didn't see those changes reflected. So there's still some conflicts on those plan sheets. One of the plan sheets, or a couple of the plan sheets that did get updated, those updates didn't reflect on every plan sheet. And so the concern is that when you take those plan sheets out for bid for construction, are the contractors bidding the correct work, or are they getting confused on what's required? They can make assumptions that maybe aren't consistent with approvals. And from a construction standpoint, when you have plan sheets that don't match what's intended, you get into problems, and then you're asking staff in the town can we just make this change? And then we're stuck with that task of, does that change make sense within the site approval, or should it go back to the planning commission for consideration? So there is a concern there that just making sure that the final drawing set that goes out for bid and is used for compliance at site inspection time, that those sheets are consistent. Some of the concerns about shade for the courtyard area were identified, and we threw a comment in here that there's general understanding that they would like to shade the courtyard, but it wasn't exactly shown how. So we know that those things can happen later depending on what is finally proposed. So we added some comments about what might be expected in the future to accomplish the shade structures. Planter box sizes, comment wasn't addressed to identify if those are large enough to accommodate the trees proposed in them. And whether there could be more of them to provide enough vegetation in that courtyard area. They did update the landscaping plan, and it's largely consistent with the town's requirements now. They increased the number of trees to satisfy the minimum requirements. There were some concerns with consistency on the landscape plan, how some of the items were counted versus what was shown in the plant schedule. Usually when there's a conflict, it's because the designer didn't go back through and update the plant schedule, which is a pretty easy fix. We rely on the drawings as shown because it shows the mature size of the plantings and the spacing. So that's what we rely on. So we just need to have them update the plant schedule, because the plant schedule is often what gets used by the contractors to bid the work. We just want to make sure there's consistency there. And then again, so a lot of these things are pretty minor in nature, but the cumulative impact shows kind of in large part that the plans just aren't quite complete. There's a lot of questions that just need to be verified. And staff is confident that the applicant and the agents are going to address these. But we do need to have the opportunity to check them to make sure that they're consistent with the town's requirements. And we can do that either at a staff level, if that's the will of the planning commission, or if the planning commission were to desire, you could have the applicant bring that back for planning commission to review those final plans with these changes addressed.
Well, if you look at all the items that are listed here that you've named, went over, are these all things that you as the staff with the applicant can take care of if we were to approve this tonight before the next town board meeting? Or is this, would that push it off to another board meeting if it wasn't done?
So I hear your question, and I'll clarify real quickly. A site plan application doesn't go to the Board of Trustees.
All right.
So the site plan, the final approval is the Planning Commission.
So the question for us is, will you be able to handle all these?
Yeah, so if the question is, can staff and the applicant work through and address these comments? I believe that we can. It'll require some effort on both parts to make sure that the understanding is clear and to update the drawings to reflect the changes. And I think that most of these are a staff level review, if the Planning Commission is okay with that. I'd also be curious if there's anything from the staff report that the Planning Commission feels that you need to weigh in on some of these items.
My biggest concern was the parking, and you've kind of answered that with the fact that you guys can take care of that, help that out. Do you guys have any more questions for Mr. Byrd?
I have a couple of comments. I mean,
That's weird.
I don't think this cake is ready to come out of the oven, to use that expression. I mean, the parking issue hasn't been permanently resolved. I mean, there's numerous other things that they seem to try to wanting to shoehorn into the site because they've maxed out their building size. I mean, the presentation prior to this, they had issues with parking, so they reduced the size of their building. And I guess I have complete confidence that Cody and staff can address this, but I think this really comes down to the Planning Commission to say, these are our rules and this is what you need to do. And I don't think this application is complete. And I would not support, I won't vote yes for it tonight, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I'm just making sure we got done with questions with Mr. Byrd, then we'll bring you up one. Thanks, Tim. Who else have any questions for Mr. Byrd?
I do want to say thank you to staff. This is very thorough for all the outstanding questions, and there's a lot of information here. So thank you guys for being so thorough in the responses.
I myself don't have a problem with you going on about making sure all this gets done. That's what you do. But I do know that it's been difficult in the past, a lot of things, it's been difficult. Fuad's he's been involved with our system before as well. And I assume that when we see this next time, it's all going to be done. Right?
I think that's everyone's goal.
Well, no, it's going to be done. I mean, otherwise we can't pass it, right? I mean, there's a lot of things here.
We won't see it again.
But we're not going to see it again at all at the planning?
You'll see
Subject-
something.
Yeah, I know
down the
I'll get
road,
to
but
see it,
You
but-
won't see the site plan again.
Okay, we won't get to see it, okay. Well, we certainly want to have it all done. Because,
Why don't we see what the applicant has to say about everything that's listed here? Come on up.
Yeah,
Fuad.
and while Fawad's making his way up here to address the mayor's comment, I think that's the question that we're asking. I think it's staff's understanding that if an item's identified in the staff report addressing a specific town requirement, that's something that the applicant would want to meet. The question is, does the Planning Commission want to see those changes corrected and brought back before the Planning Commission? Or are you comfortable with staff and the applicant working those items out and you wouldn't see it again, it'd still be subject to the comments, but staff and the applicant would reach that resolution and proceed on to the construction phase?
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Fuad Fowler. So I need to first apologize because I left the previous meeting with a misunderstanding what was required of us. I was here with all of you, and at the time we discussed specific items, and it's my mistake because I left the meeting with complete focus on the 11 items that we've captured from our discussions. And I've worked very hard with my design team and with Meridian to follow up specifically on the 11 items that we've discussed. I can go through those 11 items with you one by one, and I can tell you the steps that we've taken to address the comments that came out of that meeting. I read through the entire report and I don't disagree that there are some items. Cody mentioned it and it's my assessment as well. These items are minor items and absolutely we can address and I can address working with Cody specifically related to the parking concern because I think it's a bigger item and it came up in the discussion we've had in October. I went and talked to Meridian to have the sharing agreement that we talked about. We did not at the time when we met in October talk specifically about what kind of agreement we would have. So we put together a lease agreement that would allow us to share the parking. 13 parking spots. If you look at the off-street parking that is required with the square footage allocation that Cody shared with you, what's required is 85 parking spots. Currently, we are proposing 79 on site. So we would be underparked by 6 parking spots. The shared parking agreement that we have with Meridian give us access to 13 parking spots. So it's over what's required. I do completely get the point about having something permanent. So I came into this meeting prepared. If this is not going to work, we can agree on an allocation right now that actually fits the 79 parking spots that is on site, if that's a concern. So I've proposed a mix that allow for more restaurant and more retail and take advantage of the sharing agreement that we have with Meridian. But if that's a concern on your mind, there is an alternate mix that would correspond exactly to the parking that is available on site. So anyways, my point here is that I left the meeting in October with a specific list of items to address, and I feel like we've addressed all of those items. If there is an item that got discussed in October that we neglected to address, please bring that up. And again, I apologize if I missed the fact that one item at the end of our discussion that I've mentioned is that, hey, we won't get the chance to address the engineering comments. And the comment was, it's fine. The update to the site plan to reflect all of those minor updates will happen before we submit this for permit. This was not intended to be the final submission. This was intended to address the issues that came up in October so we can get the approval. And then we would proceed with the next step of addressing all of the remaining engineering comments and go through the detailed engineering so we can submit this to the site for permitting. And in that process, we will address those remaining comments. Anyways.
So, Floyd, there's a number of things that Mr. Byrd mentioned, the bicycle parking, extra bicycle parking possibly to help with the, I mean, obviously he said you hadn't responded to that and maybe you have, but we didn't see it. That was one of the things they suggest, okay. The ADA ramp that hasn't been changed yet theoretically to what they're saying needs to be, there's just a number of things, like 8 or 9 things he listed tonight that really need to be handled before we can approve this.
So the bicycle, additional bicycle is not a problem.
And I assume that, but I'm just wondering why, if they've sent it to you guys, why they haven't got anything back from you stating that you would do something there, as well as the lighting. Facts clarified. There's a lot of things that really haven't been addressed yet. Am I correct, Mr. Burden?
Well, can I comment on that? Sorry, the question was to you, Cody. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. So when we go through a site plan review process, the commissioners are pretty familiar with the template that we use. It has all the criteria that we look at as a staff to identify if the site proposed development has met that criteria or not. So the template is pretty standard in terms of what we're reviewing. and what staff sees on the site plans that are submitted. That same template was used as the basis for the site plan review for Fawad's site. And the last site plan approval heard tonight, those staff reports look pretty similar. So all the comments that were in the October meeting are the comments that staff is referring to for specific standards that the staff has called out where the requirements haven't been met.
Thought I understand what you're saying because we left the October meeting with a specific list and it's in the packet. There's an 11 item bullet point list that looks like those items were addressed in full, correct?
Yes, and the parking lease agreement versus an easement wasn't well defined in that discussion. So that's certainly something that we can figure out and we can work
So
to get that done.
I understand where you're coming from. If your mindset was to address the 11 items that we specifically told you need to address before you come back before this board again, you did it, you did your job.
Right, and again, I may have, this is what my focus was. This is what I've worked on. It doesn't mean that it was the right thing to do, but the commissioner is absolutely right. I left the meeting with that focus on those items and addressing those items. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't, it doesn't mean we wouldn't address the remaining comments. So adding additional, and this is just an example, adding additional bicycle parking is not a problem at all from my point of view. The point about the ADA, Commissioner, we've actually addressed it to our knowledge, but it looks like we haven't addressed it sufficiently. So we need to have that discussion.
Right, that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, so we thought we've addressed it sufficiently, but there is additional comment that came as after we submitted the plans that it's not addressed sufficiently, or there is additional clarification needed. We'll absolutely follow up on that and address those comments. But I just don't want you to, I don't want you to think that we've discussed this in October and we just ignored it. We did not.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Yeah, I think we had that list of 11 things, but they were all acknowledged, I think, in staff comments before, but we prioritized the biggest ones. And I think those were the 11 items. So to give everybody due credit, of course, I think we all have the best intentions and wanting this move forward. But
I think the decision really is just if we delay this another month and the applicant takes care of all of the staff comments, is it things that we're just going to be looking to your guidance anyway to say, have they satisfied these requirements? And you say, yes, they have. And we say, okay, it's cleared. I don't personally see the point in bringing it back to planning commission if that's the end result of tabling this for another 30 days. So
I do like it this way. If we as the planning commission feel confident in the staff to complete this list that Mr. Bird went over, I'm good with that.
As a caveat, I get my right glasses on.
Is you talking glasses?
They need to be addressed before they come to our the board of trustees, and we don't want to go through this again, right?
Correct. Again, on a site plan doesn't go through to the board of trustees. The planning commission is the final approval on site plans.
We're going to look at a building and all this thing, though, aren't we? When it comes before us.
No, so just to clarify the process, after a site plan is approved, a building permit would be submitted to the building department for plan review. But the building elevations you see in your planning packet, that's what was provided by the applicant as the proposal for the planning commission consideration for the architectural elements.
Oh, so that's it.
So this is the final approval, except for acceptance of the corrected site plans and the building permit process. Building permit process doesn't come before any public body.
So if we approve this tonight, in a year, we can look down at all the stuff and go through and see if Cody got them all done with the applicant correctly. It really is just a bottom line of knowing that Mr. Bird's group will pull this off and get it done correctly with the applicant. And I don't think the applicant has any issue with that.
No, I'm committed to taking care of those items right away. I mean, Cody worked with me before, but anyways, I mean, tomorrow I will be starting to going through these bolded items with my staff and addressing them one by one.
Yeah. And I mean, you won't get a building permit until they are all
Yeah,
acknowledged.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah. No temporary permits and all that kind of thing.
No, it's occupancy.
Yeah,
but yeah.
a building permit would be the next step, and that's typically we have an approved set of site plans with all the revised drawings included before a building permit's issued.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Floyd. All right, well, if we have any more questions for the applicant or Mr. Byrd, we'll close this part of the meeting and open it to the public. Anyone in the public wish to say anything? All right, that went quick. Okay, back to the board. Any other questions or discussions?
In addition to all the comments, pose the parking easement requirement, if that were a requirement for this, as
Good
we would
question.
determine.
That's a good question, and I think consistent with Commissioner Whitehouse's comments, correct me if I misspeak here, Commissioner Whitehouse, but the intent, as we understood it from some of our past examples, which maybe wasn't communicated clearly to the applicant, so I'm not assigning blame, but I think the intent is to create a shared parking arrangement that is perpetual by recording an easement across those two properties so that both are encumbered, to make sure that lasts and isn't terminated by one party or the other. And we can
That is a
certainly-
correct synopsis.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitehouse. And we can certainly work with the applicant to propose that language. I do still need to have two willing parties to execute an easement in that form or fashion. So that could be the potential stumbling block. I've worked with Fawad on project in the past, and he's been very communicative and willing to help find those solutions. I've worked with Brian Thomas at Meridian Trust Federal Credit Union, and I believe that they're interested in finding those solutions as well. But I'll throw that caveat out there that that's the one thing I can't do is force people to sign a document.
Right.
Would the wording be appropriate to say a recorded parking easement?
I think that would be an appropriate, yes.
Fire away.
I move to approve the site plan for Lot 6 and Lot 7 Meridian First Subdivision, subject to the town staff and engineering comments, and resubmission of revised site plans and a recorded parking easement arrangement with Meridian Trust. Period.
1 second.
Commissioner Kinney, before there's a second, could I just ask for a point of clarification?
Yes, please.
You specified an off-site parking arrangement with Meridian Trust Credit Union. Can we just simply say adjacent lot? In case there's a different ownership there that fits the bill that isn't the Meridian Credit Union?
Okay, I'm going to amend my motion. I move to approve the site plan for Lot 6 and Lot 7 Meridian First Subdivision, subject to town staff and engineering comments, resubmission of revised site plans, and adjacent parking easement
And
recording.
recorded, if I can propose that
Please.
language, a recorded parking easement with an adjacent property.
Recorded parking easement with adjacent property. Thank you.
Very good. We have a second. Who wants to second that?
I'll second it.
Mr. Connect seconded. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Whitehouse,
No.
Keeney,
Yes.
Hammond,
Yes.
Knack,
Yes.
Sarter,
Yes.
Fredericks,
Yes.
McCaffrey.
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you very much for being here tonight. All right. Planning Commission schedule for 2022.
Yes, so this should be a quick one. It was the last item in your packet. And just real high level, what we're proposing is every year, we adopt a schedule of what the planning commission dates are, along with the applicable closing schedule for applications to the planning commission. We do that each year as a means to help applicants and agents working for those applicants to understand the timelines necessary to meet public hearing requirements, site plan reviews, and et cetera. I actually don't take a whole lot of credit for this. Liz is the one who went through the 2022 calendar dates and pulled out what the first Mondays are. And then there's a couple of holiday conflicts each year. So on a holiday week, the planning commission just meets the following Monday. So we've built out that schedule for planning commission meetings, submission deadlines, and then identified the earliest town board meeting that those applications could go to if it's a public hearing item that goes to the town board. And that schedule is included the very last page of your packet. For 2022, the two holiday conflicts were the 4th of July. I think that's the Monday is the actual holiday. So the offices would be closed, and that would meet the following Monday, July 11th. And the other one is Labor Day weekend, which we would again meet the following Monday, which would be September 12th. Any questions on the annual schedule of the planning commission?
We don't need a motion for that, do we?
I do have some feedback on the January one, and maybe this could be considered in future, even though it's not a holiday. January 3rd, school doesn't go back in session until, I guess, that week, but that might be 1 week that we maybe consider in the future, pushing back another week based on when school goes back in session, and people generally travel right up until then. So that would be the only one I would consider. And I wouldn't be present, but that's just me, but maybe for future reference to correlate with the school district calendar. Because usually school isn't in session that first Monday.
Yeah, we're happy to take a look at that. And that's an easy enough change if you think that's appropriate for this coming year. Obviously, those dates haven't passed yet, so it's something that we can consider for the January 2022 date.
Yeah, so I would consider doing that one to January 10th. Would be my suggestion on that one. The rest of them, though, for those holidays make sense to me. So that's my only one I was
I have
concerned
no
about.
problem moving that to the 10th.
And I think that's probably true for most folks, including applicants. As long as they see the schedule and know what the expectations are, they can adjust their timelines to meet that. So I don't see that as being problematic. I'll throw this out there, not on, and to answer the question a moment ago, I would recommend a motion and vote on this since we presented it as an action item. But I'll throw it out there for future consideration too. The first Monday, I'm not sure exactly kind of how that was selected or identified. I know other planning commissions and other statutory towns meet on different days of the week based on their needs. So that's another consideration that staff looked at, that in many instances, we were receiving new information for a packet up until the Friday when the packets go out. That's why you usually see those packets come out at 6 o'clock on a Friday, is we're getting information the day of Friday that we're trying to incorporate and include. Moving that date or the meeting night to something other than a Monday would give staff the same time to meet that Friday packet release and publication, and allow a little bit more time for planning commission to digest the agenda packet. So if that's something that's at all desirable, that could be something we look at for the future, is evaluating if another night of the week makes sense for planning commission meetings.
I just thought we did it on Monday night so we could miss the national championship game of basketball in college every year.
Yeah, that's like, we hear about that a lot. It is Monday Night Football too.
What other nights are available here?
Not Tuesdays.
I was gonna say the Thursday nights are largely available. I'd have to double check the calendar. But the Board of Adjustments meets on the 4th Thursday of the month, and that's the one that I'm really aware of. The Tuesday nights are tough because of board meetings. Wednesday nights, there's other meetings going on.
But board doesn't meet on the first Tuesday of the month.
Do it on the first Tuesday. Yeah. That way it's always Tuesday.
It's possible.
I would prefer Tuesday over Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, I don't want to run on Wednesday.
Well, I was
Man,
gonna
I've
say there might be a
Been doing
conflict
this on
because
Tuesdays or Mondays for 16 years.
You're still gonna show up on Monday.
What's that?
Tim has a comment.
Tim? go
well, there
ahead,
may
Tim.
be a conflict going to Tuesday because sometimes, you know, if the first Monday, sometimes planning commission gets pushed back because of just how the calendar falls, and then you couldn't push it back to the next Tuesday because second,
Good
third, and
point.
fourth Tuesdays are trustees meetings. So that there may be a hiccup there.
We could evaluate. That's a good point. And
Yeah,
to
it
be honest,
It
staff
happens
has,
often.
yeah, it does. And
It does.
and then you end up with for those that
Why
are
don't-
on.
Maybe that's why Monday was originally picked. Just
Could be. We
Good
could take
day.
a look at it and bring some more information back. I think in my opinion, I think it'd be prudent to adopt the schedule for 2022 as it's presented and with the change that Commissioner Kinney recommended. And then we can always update it if we feel the need to. Just we want to make sure we have enough advance notice for applicants to plan their schedules, but we
We
can
do
some
Friday
more-
nights, well, Friday.
Let's not.
Saturday, guys.
anybody come?
Friday is for
You
kickball.
guys. Where to be?
Staff we could do a quick analysis and see what nights would make sense, and then we could bring some information back as just a presentation at a future meeting date.
How about meeting at 5:30 regularly?
I wouldn't have a problem with that. I don't know that Mr. Bird's gonna buy us dinner for the rest of the
Yeah, I don't
life,
need all
but
that.
it's,
I'm generous, but I might have my limits.
might
Are
have
you
a
buying
couple
this
concerns
personally?
about applicants being able to make it at 5:30.
You serious?
No, you're not.
You didn't buy this food?
That's not on the agenda.
No.
What do you do when you have a work session? Does it move to 4:30?
Wow, that got deep.
I like not getting home really late because then I can see my kids go to bed. So I like coming, I like being here earlier. So if that's possible, I think I'd like.
We're happy to take a look at some alternatives. That one thing I'll throw out there is that to change the official meeting time or the official meeting day, we would update the municipal code because that's identified in the code when the planning commission meets. So it's going to take a bigger conversation anyhow, but we're happy to do some staff research and propose some options and for a future discussion.
So we can go ahead and approve this one.
Yes.
Motion.
I move to approve the calendar as shown with the exception of moving January 3rd to January 10th for 2022.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Whitehouse,
Yes.
Kinney,
Yes.
Hammond.
Yep.
Knack,
Yes.
Sarter,
Yes.
Friedrichs,
Yes.
McCaffrey.
Yes. Motion passed. Thank you. Any announcements, Mr. Bird?
No, the announcement I made earlier, December, we have one agenda item. I think it should be relatively brief. And so our proposal is to conduct the work session at 5:30, conduct business for the planning commission at 6:30, and then reconvene in work session format to continue the land use code update discussion.
Okay.
So,
Rebecca can leave early if she needs to go say goodnight to her kids.
I won't make that decision for her. We just wanted to, we know that the land use code has a lot of topics that could go into a lot deeper conversation than the 1 hour work sessions allows. So we were looking for, this seemed like a good opportunity to go a little bit deeper.
Good.
So we wanted to try and take advantage of that if we could.
All right, with that, meeting adjourned at 7:50. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners.